Either we are there or not, ITSP Magazine still gets the best stories. There are plenty of conferences and all sorts of events that spark our curiosity and allow us to start conversations with some of the world's brightest minds. In person or virtually, we sit down with them at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Together, we discover what the synergy of these three elements means for the future of humanity. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Hello, everybody. This is Marco Ciappelli, another episode of Redefining Society Podcast here on ITSP Magazine, where we talk about cybersecurity, technology, society, which, as I often say nowadays, is pretty much everything. So I just need a good excuse to have a good conversation. And honestly, I needed no excuse to have this one because we're going to talk about something I'm extremely passionate about it, and it's still something that despite all these years, I still would like to understand where we're going with this. And I'm talking about the Jetsons. The smart cities that I thought it was going to be the Jetsons, the TV show, but it never happened, at least not that way. And today, to talk about that, we have Jen Sanders, which is actually the founder of the North Texas Innovation Alliance. We are connected also to talk a little bit about this big expo happening in Barcelona in very few days, or maybe when I publish that, it's already happened, but around these days. And so there is a lot to talk about. It's smart cities is where we live, at least most of the population, and something that we want to understand. So I hope Jen will help us doing that. Jen, thank you for coming to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I get to talk about one of my favorite things as well.
Perfect. So we're definitely not going to run out of topics. But what I would like to start with is who is Jen?
Oh, gosh, where should we begin? No, well, it's a pleasure to speak with you today. And, as we talked about in the pre-show for the audience, is our backgrounds in kind of the social sciences, public affairs, political science. And so really my background is in consulting around those areas and working with lots of different clients and really trying to understand, again, how do our decisions ultimately impact society? Where are we really trying to go outside of the nuts and bolts of how we get there? And so after coming out of consulting in 2015, I co-founded the Dallas Innovation Alliance, which is another nonprofit consortium that's meant to operate inside and outside the city because we can do things that aren't possible inside of city government to try and move more quickly. Had some really great success there, and we're able to be very supportive of the city and our partners. And in 2019, we launched the North Texas Innovation Alliance. We always knew we needed to go regional because human impact doesn't stop at jurisdictional boundaries. And Dallas-Fort Worth particularly, almost 40% of our residents cross at least one county line every day. And so we know we need things to work.
I love that you said that. And this is where we're going to start with our, let's say, sociological background. Because nowadays, when I think about the world, I think about a global economy, a global communication. It's the global village, the Marshall McLuhan one that actually did happen in larger scale. But I still think that the community are at the core of who we are. I mean, there is so much that as individual we can interact at a deeper level, but there is also a lot that we can interact at a global level. So that balance there, I feel like what you said, I could start with this. What's your take on that?
No, I completely agree. And it's interesting. There's obviously a lot going on in the world today that's posing a lot of challenges, and at a minimum, really causing some paralysis at the individual level in terms of what do we do? How do we help? What does this all mean? And I have a friend that's involved in global affairs, and so she's frequently traveling. And I actually spoke with her the other day, and I just said, how are you doing? And she was talking about that. And then she said, how are you doing? How do you cope? And I said, I focus on what I can have control over, or at minimum impact, which is locally. So I tend to look at the hyper local and what can we do together individually as global citizens. to make change from the bottom up, because really that's where it all happens. That's where that quality of life component is anchored, so that then we can broaden and all work together. So I really start focused hyper local and bridge out through partnerships, and she's really focused on the macro. But I think it takes every piece of that to create the world that we all want to live in.
Absolutely. So what the organization does is connecting all of this, which we hope we can connect to the global level, which is much harder, but maybe at the local, you can put together politicians and regulators and companies and the citizen, I'm assuming. So how what's the magic formula there, if there is one?
I think it's, in large measure, exactly what you described, is how do we get everyone in a room? As a nonprofit consortium model, I always say to folks, I said, I'm not getting rich off of this. My goal is bigger. It's to bring people together in a neutral, independent way. And so we're made up at this point of over 40 individual entities, and those do range from residents to nonprofits to cities, counties, agencies, the private sector, academic sector, from K through 12 through postdoc. And so what we're really trying to do is get people in a room that may not have been in the same room prior to that. But really what we know, and what you alluded to, is you can start with one focus area, but really they are so interrelated now that we really need the perspectives of all of those different disciplines to come together to find the best possible solution. So what we try and do is create those organic collisions in conversation. We try to create opportunities to educate. We know that cities and public entities particularly, they don't ever come to me and say, gosh, I have too much money and too much time, to solve some of these problems. And so how can we be kind of that cog in the wheel, or that subject matter expert that can connect these dots and help create the solutions or the perspectives that there just isn't time, in the day-to-day life to get there. So we're trying to break silos, both within departments, between organizations, between sectors, to try and, again, find the commonalities that get us to that North Star faster. So that's a little bit of the magic of what we hope to do, and certainly have had some great outcomes since we were founded.
So talking about that, I think I can say, and you can say, the word smart city, and a bunch of people are going to think about something different. It could be a great tabletop game to play, right?
Yeah, you could.
So even agree on that. It could be a challenge. So let's start with your vision. If I ask you, I don't know what a smart city is. What is for you a smart city?
No, 100%. And that was the most important thing we did at the inset, is say, how do we come together and rally around one definition? And that definition isn't singularly focused on technology. And so what we do is we look at that holistic approach, but the definition we work from is a smart city finds that intersection point between community data and technology to improve quality of life, economic opportunity, and resource efficiencies. And so we're really looking at the end game is, how do we use technology and data as a catalyst to get people in communities and systems to where they need to be for us to remain competitive and have all of the opportunities that the world and the digital world, more and more so, can offer.
And where do you feel we are? Let's talk about your geographic area, which is Dallas and Texas, which we're not talking about a small place. It could be very much representative of any other large city in the US, or Singapore, or Sydney, Australia, or wherever. Where do you feel we are in terms of what a smart city is? Could you consider one of these big city or small city like Peachtree Corner? I was talking to the CTO there, and he was like, well, we can do here at a small city. It's not possible maybe to do. I mean, if you want to experiment the way we're doing, it's probably easier in a small town that is thought based on that than taking San Francisco maybe, or Dallas, or Florence, Italy, where I'm from, was designed for horses and carriage, and what do we do there? So where are we now for a city like Dallas or any other Houston in Texas in terms of smart city?
So I think when we began, we looked to Europe quite a bit, and certainly Asia. But one of the benefits one of the catalysts we saw and deduced from Europe specifically is the age of the cities. So the challenges that we were facing, or we're starting to face in Dallas, a much younger city, as it relates to aging infrastructure and different needs of the community and of buildings. Europe, was up against that, in those decision points and using these new tools sooner. So we've learned a great deal, just kind of as a first point of reference from those that came before us. And that's always the hope, is what we learn can then be passed down. But I think the current state of smart cities, and Brandon and Peachtree Corners, it's a great point to raise. If it's a newer city, so you have more greenfield. If it's a smaller city, often they can move more quickly, and they've done an incredible job of leveraging their strengths. The government has been extraordinarily involved in ways that a lot of governments don't, because of the complexity of it. So I think that the secret sauce in Peachtree and Curiosity Labs is something that already is highly sought after to replicate, and certainly has been and should be. So I think there's benefits to smaller communities, and we certainly see that within our region as well. Some of the smaller cities are doing some of the most, I'd say, pragmatically innovative things, because it's not all flying cars, right? In terms of where you need to start. But I think that I don't think that there's a city, maybe in the world, but certainly in the US, that I would say they have fully realized the vision of smart city, because there's so many pieces that come into it. So there's cities that I think do mobility incredibly well, or data incredibly well, and electrification. Tyler at the Colorado Smart Cities Alliance and the work that they're doing on electrification is extraordinarily impressive. And so I think in North Texas, in Texas specifically, I think that there's a lot of pieces that are being deployed. I think that the way broadband infrastructure and connectivity to internet, which there's a huge gap nationally and certainly in North Texas, I think that that's being done extremely well. I think upgrading systems internal to cities for city services, a lot of use of AI is starting in ways that are very, again, responsible and pragmatic. I think everybody's being very cautious, and should be. And then certainly things like sustainable construction, dig once policies for roadways, traffic signal optimization. I could keep going on, but I think that there are pieces that have incredible momentum. And I think that the big point within our membership is we really look at our members as being able to informally mentor each other, because we're all, again, trying to get to a unified, cohesive region that has interoperability, and shared standards, so these systems and these investments can work seamlessly across those investments jurisdictionally. I'll take a breath there.
No, I was going to let you go, because you were already answering questions before I asked them. So that's great. That makes a great guest. But I want to go a little bit deeper in what you said, because I always think about the people listening or watching, the audience. So they live in a city, they go around, and I always like the example of what's on stage and what's backstage, right? Or let's say you go to Disneyland and everything is just perfect out there maybe, but you don't realize how much happened behind the scene. So me as a citizen, not knowing anything about it, how do I spot a smart city? Let's play the game.
No, it really is kind of a Where's Waldo, isn't it? I think, and that's something. So our first project in 2016 we called it the Smart Cities Living Lab, and it was a 6-block corridor in a historic part of downtown. And one thing that was really important, because of exactly what you said, is we need to make sure that there are some highly visible, installations or projects that we do, because otherwise, anyone we take down to tour, anytime we're trying to educate the public on what this is and what it's doing, very few of these smart elements are visible. They're not gaudy, they're not flying, they're not, they're not immediately visible. And so we had a mix of those things that you can point to, like a kiosk, environmental sensors in some cases. We turned a parking lot into a park that had a lot of smart elements. So a lot of opportunities for education. But what we hope is that you don't have to see things to feel the impact in your life. So we talk about things like when we're explaining to residents why all this money is being spent on upgrading the traffic signals. In large measure, it's so their commute is shorter, so the idling time is shorter, so the emissions are lessened. And so what we hope is that people notice it in their quality of life by saying, gosh, my commute is now 7 minutes shorter. I'm not sure why that happened, but what we know is that it's these smart city technologies that are really enabling, again, the improvement of quality of life. So in some cases, you got to have something to point to that's really, really obvious. But in other ways, I'll just say, I don't mind if people don't know what it is. I just want them to really have that recognition of something's better,
And in a way, we go back to the beginning when I said everybody's going to think about a smart city as something different, because maybe someone is more driven by environmental changes, wants to see more greens, they want to see more solar panel and electrification. They want to see more recharge for electric cars. Someone else may want to get to work faster, may want to have a better transportation system, and others just don't see it at all. So, but you kind of have to show and tell, because that's where the money goes, right? From the citizen too. So I understand that.
Well, and to your point, even if they don't know that they care about a specific thing, kind of at an institutional level, what we always try and look at is what, we do a lot of resident surveys, before we plan projects, and say, what are the biggest pain points? What are you most concerned about? And a lot of people and groups do that. What we're looking for are things like my energy bills, so we'll look at things like that. And then you kind of back into what's going to help solve for that for a resident. And it might be teaching them how to, individually at a residential level, what tools can they use? It might be something much broader. My power always goes out. Is this a grid issue, or is this something else? But, they just know that they're cold, or they just know that they're at risk. And so that's where things like microgrids, come into play, or extra battery storage, or that vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to building, bidirectional charging. So we have so many tools at our disposal right now, but how do we make sure that we're solving the right problems that actually help the people that we serve? Because it's not going to be universal across all geographies. As you know, that's the other complication of how you make those decisions.
And that's another great point. There is technology for pretty much everything nowadays. We're getting to maybe even better CO2 absorption or anything like that. But also, you say you don't have that problem where somebody comes to you and say, I really don't know what to do with my budget. It's just sitting there. I just found the treasure. So how do you prioritize? Is it something that you do by looking at what other people have done municipality have done successfully? How do you manage to decide, if we have this much money, this is where it's going to go?
I think, and I often joke, things get above my pay grade very quickly, so we're trying to do all of the upfront research, and so we're basically trying to develop, here's the best practice on a platter, and say, you decide if this is where the budget should go. I just want to be very clear. I'm writing no big checks. That'd be nice though. But so I think one is, constantly getting a temperature check on what's most important to those municipalities. We have, a really strong, I call it the smart city family, so relationships with probably 100 cities around the world at this point. So we're always learning from each other, and I can always pick up the phone and call Brandon, or call David Graham in Carlsbad, or whomever, and just say, I remember this project you did that work? Do you think that is something that should be replicated? And then you can really try and put those pieces together. And we always look at what is the readiness of a city at the beginning. So if, a city council member comes to me and says, I just want X. And I say, first you need to invest in these pieces of the stack from a data analytics standpoint or something. I said, we don't yet have the foundation to just deploy that, but here's what we could do in short order to get some impact that maybe would justify the level of investment to really modernize some of the systems that have to be done first. And those are probably the least sexy, projects from that perspective, because those are definitely ones that the public does not see, all of the guts of data storage, and are we moving to cloud, and what does the 5G look like, and is that a place to invest? So I think in terms of prioritizing, we also look at things like bonds that are already in planning mode. And City of Dallas has a big one that's going to the ballot for capital projects next year. And so we look at things like, looks like this much money is going to streets. While we're at it, have you thought about incorporating these technologies? Because it would be much more efficient to do those at the same time. Is that something where we can find some extra funding? Or another example that I really love that we've been putting together is around the World Cup. And so this is obviously the biggest thing to happen, in a very long time in terms of the impact of this sporting event. And the U.S. is so thrilled to have so many of the matches. And certainly Dallas is raring to go. And what that means in planning for large scale events like this is a lot of investment to make sure everything goes smoothly. And so what we really have done so far is got a roundtable together of a lot of stakeholders and said, what are you most concerned with? And can we put an innovation lens around the planning for these projects that we need to do? And can we make sure that those projects and their impacts will benefit the region long after this event happens? So if there's something that the transportation planner in a city said, I've always wanted to do this, or I've been begging to do this project for years, is something like the World Cup, the momentum that has enough backing behind it to be able to get that done, for multiple reasons. But how do we make sure investments are really ultimately serving the public long after the world comes to town?
I have to say that as an Italian, I have seen projects done and then said that station that you see there was made for the World Cup in I don't even remember when it was, or Olympic game in Rome, and then it's sitting there like a ghost station where a ghostly train arrives and all the money is put it there. So I want to talk about that, about how long ahead you have to think, because people may think, well, yeah, sure, let's implement this infrastructure. Well, hold on your horses, right? I mean, it's not easy. Right. Start digging in an old town in Europe, and the Belle Arti are going to.
You don't know what you're going to find either, right?
So
is that
no
pipe
metro
where we thought it was? Is that map even accurate? We haven't gone down there in so long. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but so let's talk about what is feasible from a technology perspective, and what is feasible now, and what is feasible in 20 years, because you can't just flip on a dime and make it happen. And so I'm connecting to, let's have a long-term goal here and prove to the stakeholders and the citizen that, remember what we did 2 years ago, and now this is what we're doing. Now it's still going in that direction, and the overall result is going to be that. Because I think that's the trick of politics.
It is, and getting things done that take longer than an election cycle to fully realize is a challenge, and I can certainly understand that and understand both sides of that. But to your point, that's why the short, mid, and long-term vision is so important, because you have to have wins that you can see in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years. And so really mapping that out without getting bogged down in the block and tackle of the short term is it's obviously a massive challenge, or we wouldn't be talking about it. But I think, what are those quick wins? Those are things that you have the backbone to do already. And so I think you see that with a lot of different drone type deployments and applications, and we've got some stories we can talk about later around that as well. But I think if you're looking at public safety applications, if you're looking at how do you use camera systems that you already have in place that do have the ability to now incorporate other functions. So I think that there's things to do short term. I think there's things like curb management. There's a lot of talk about the traffic around rideshare. How are you going to accommodate in a dense area, not having that contribute greatly to the congestion? How are people going? How are you managing people movement from a safety perspective and a quality of experience? And I think that those types of things can be piloted very quickly, and you wait 90 days and you see how the residents respond. You see, is it doing what it's meant to do? Then you're ready to roll that out monstrously, across a much larger area. So I think, again, it's a mix of what do we know we can do quickly, but make sure it still fits into that longer term plan. But the capital projects that take 20 years, here's my other soapbox. We're in Texas, and cars are dominant here, as opposed to other forms of transportation. And in order to get the will to not build those extra lanes of traffic, there's a lot of other factors at play that need to come into play. And I think I have a friend that worked for the Rocky Mountain Institute and a number of other research areas in mobility for years and years. And one of the things that she shared with me is she's like, I just feel like we're thinking about this all wrong in terms of how do you get people out of your cars. She said it's behavioral economics, not direct, please carpool and then we'll buy free lunch at, whatever point, or there's something like this. But she said it's a long-term behavioral economic cycle is the way we really need to be looking at this, and not just improvements infrastructurally, because it's so ingrained. And so again, with the plug for the social science as well, as how are we looking at that gradual shift in behavior and openness, which then leads to support politically to continue down the path of something that is going to take 10 and 20 years.
It's complicated. I live in LA, so you want to talk about cars.
It is wild. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I've seen any smart 405 yet, but that's a different story. Maybe there is
405 years.
Yeah.
No, I know CDOT and LA DOT are doing some really wonderful things.
Oh, no.
To your point, it just takes time though, and I know you weren't saying that, but it really.
Yeah. Especially that it goes in proportion to the size of the urban area you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. Let's talk. I want to talk about data, but I feel like that could be a conversation on its own. So I don't want to go there. I don't want to open that can of data, knowing where it goes. Let's talk about the Expo in Barcelona 2023, which is happening in a short amount of time. But also there's going to be, I believe, one in New York in 2024, and the organizer are really bringing it around the world, which is great because it should be like that. What do you expect from a huge event like that, and why is important that a different organization like yours go there, technology company go there and display their product, their innovation, and why do we do this and why it's important?
So many reasons, and I'll tell you, every year when I tell people I'm going on a work trip to Barcelona, I feel like a big jerk saying something like that. And I say it really is so high value, beyond obviously it being a lovely place to visit, because there's so many peers. There are so many countries, there are so many cities that have such a strong presence there for us to learn from and understand what's working. And I don't think I've been to a conference outside of this one that has a heavier proportion of public sector booths at the Expo. And which is one, fascinating and so helpful for us in relationships and learning, and then coupling that with the companies that are based around the world that we may not be aware of, or solutions that we may not know about. So it's, number one, learning. Number two, new partnerships. Three, we want to come back with a lot of ideas with new people that can help in fulfilling them. And this year particularly, we really want to look at how do we empower more international companies and fast growth or startup companies to come and test in North Texas. We really want to, we have a really strong environment in different facilities or complexes or support organizations, that we really think that cross-border is a really strong selling point for the region, and we certainly learn and want to grow that way too. This is kind of the perfect pool to swim in, if you will.
Mm-hmm. I want to take advantage of having you here, you're not necessarily just a technical person. You understand the technology, but you're like me, you put it in perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So the testing part, we look at the news, and I love news, but sometimes I feel like they're not helping. Sorry, journalists out there. San Francisco, testing all the cars. It's always a bad news. I've been there. It's kind of cool. Let's go around. I'm excited to try one. Still hasn't happened for me. But I feel like it's also really hard to test cars in San Francisco. It's hard to drive in San Francisco. I drive from LA there. It's wonderful, but it's a challenge already. So you're choosing a very challenging city to do that. I feel like if an autonomous vehicle is going to make it in San Francisco, probably going to make it in a lot of other U.S. cities.
Mm-hmm.
But on one side, you have the people that don't want to change, that don't realize that one little accident, it's only one versus a gazillion of accidents that happen every day with people driving and getting distracted. And we had this conversation a lot. But from your perspective, I think that, or at least I hear that technology could be there, safe enough to be deployed. But we need the political okay to do it. And that probably applies to a lot of things. But do we have older mentality here, an ancient mentality to do new things?
You know what? I think it's less of an older mentality and just the human nature to be afraid of change. I don't think it's generational as much as it's purely human nature. I think some of the reasons for hesitation might look a little bit different, but that is why testing is so important. But testing in a vacuum can only happen for so long. We talk about pilot paralysis, I think, and then how do you get it to shift beyond there? And so I think closed environments are such an important place to start. And then it's about how do you get into the public right of way, the publicly owned infrastructure. After a university campus testing is successful, as an example, or an industrial complex. Are we ready? I think I applaud the companies that are saying, you know what, we're ready. We're just going to go to San Francisco or to Austin or to Dallas, and just go learn and be able to have that visibility and those learnings, because that's an aggressive jump, from controlled testing. And so I think, to your point, it's how are we making sure that the stories about the benefits come into play, and really, but everything has to be put into context, because to your point, only focusing on the negative, which goes far beyond technology, is not going to prove out anything successfully in terms of how news travels. So again, it's pragmatic risk being taken, and certainly autonomous vehicles are allowed in the state of Texas. But are you creating that dedicated lane? Is it about starting from, we're still going to do a test environment that has a very small public right-of-way corridor? How much public engagement are we doing before anything steps wheels on the road, in a certain place? Yep. So I think there's a lot of steps there, and a willingness for risk. So much of it is about what is the approach prior to actually deploying that. And that's the case with a lot of technology. We could talk about facial recognition. We could talk about all kinds of things that really require a longer period than I think people realize you need to really be able to create awareness and education around the how and the why and the what of doing something new. So that's where I'm really, heavily passionate about, is what kind of commitments need to be made to residents from the standpoint of when new technology comes into place, so they feel comfortable and that this is for their benefit and why.
Right. Well, we're going to leave it there because, again, there's so much we can talk about.
We're done already? Oh, my word.
Yeah, we're done. It's 35 minutes almost. And it's not that I want to stop it, but I think there's a lot to digest there. I think we cover a lot of ground. I think the people listening right now, they probably have a lot of questions. So I'd rather let it hang in there, not try to answer to everything. And maybe I'll have you back and we can talk about some more specific, even the data and the privacy and that side of things. But I want to thank you very much for giving this 101 of how complicated things are when you put together people, politics, technology, regulation, and psychology as well. So I want to let everybody know that they can find all the links to you and your organization in the notes of this podcast. I invite everybody to subscribe for many more stories. I invite you to come back anytime you want to. Maybe you come back and tell us about the Expo. How about that?
I'd be delighted. And any viewers that are going to be there, where we have a booth at the U.S. Pavilion, we would love to have come learn more about our organization. And we have 4 cities in North Texas that also are going to be coming this year. It's the biggest North Texas takeover so far in Barcelona. So we're very excited to share more.
Very cool. So everybody's going to be there. It's not just the city. It's also what's happening there. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you again. And everybody, stay tuned for more story. And I know we will talk way more about smart cities because I like it. So why not?
You're the boss.
I hope I make decision for what interests in the audience as well. Thank you again. Goodbye, everybody. Stay tuned. I'll see you soon.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of our on-location conversation. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.